Over the years, UFC fans have been treated to several outstanding matchups. Although in truth, the bouts that stick with us tend to be the ones that generated a great deal of hype beforehand, especially at press conferences. Over the years, we have seen some wild press conferences, which in turn have helped to create some of the most anticipated matchups in UFC history. In many ways, they can be every bit as exciting as the fights themselves. So for this video, we've decided to take a look at some of the craziest and most unexpected moments during a UFC press conference. As always, if you guys enjoy this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Now without further ado, and ranked in no particular order, let's take a look at 10 of the craziest moments during a UFC press conference. Number 10. Conor McGregor vs Jose Aldo, UFC 189. With his sharp tongue and boisterous personality, Dublin's own Conor McGregor has taken part in more than a few memorable press conferences on his way to becoming the UFC's biggest star. The Dublin native definitely knows how to get the masses talking, and he did just that at UFC World Tour press conference back in 2015. This event was held to promote a bout between McGregor and then featherweight title holder Jose Aldo at UFC 189. During the verbal exchange, Jose Aldo boldly declared himself the King of Dublin, which naturally didn't sit too well with McGregor. The Irishman took exception to the comment and responded by walking over to Aldo's table and snagging the featherweight title.
You're looking at him! You're looking at him! You're looking at him! What's he gonna do? What's he gonna do? What's he gonna do?
As a result, the crowd erupted, as UFC President Dana White managed to keep the two from going at it on stage. Unfortunately, despite the anticipation, fans would have to wait to see the two legends collide, as Aldo was forced to withdraw from the fight due to an injury and would be replaced by Chad Mendes. McGregor and Aldo would eventually collide in December of 2015, with the notorious one managing to dispatch the champion in just 13 seconds. Number 9. Jon Jones vs Daniel Cormier, UFC 178. You would be hard-pressed to find two fighters who dislike each other more than Daniel Cormier and the reigning light heavyweight champion Jon Jones. There have been several incidents in which press conferences and face-offs almost result in a brawl. However, heading into UFC 178, no one could stop Jones and Cormier from getting their hands on one another. This memorable scuffle started when DC shoved Jones while the two men were facing off. The champ then responded by pushing Dave Scholler aside and attacking his rival. The infamous melee is one of the rare times in which a face-off has actually turned violent. But in the end, Jones was forced to pull out of the event due to injury. Of course, these two would eventually clash for the first time at UFC 182, a fight in which Jones emerged the victor via unanimous decision. Number 8. Conor McGregor vs Nate Diaz, UFC 202. When you have two athletes who know how to build a fight, a memorable press conference is to be expected. Heading into their highly anticipated rematch at UFC 202, Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz took part in one of the most bizarre spectacles fight fans have ever seen. McGregor has made somewhat of a habit of arriving late to press conferences, and at UFC 202, this was no exception. The event began with McGregor showing up late and Diaz leaving early out of frustration. However, on his way out, Nate Diaz hurled insults at McGregor and then followed them up with his signature one-finger salute. After trading a few verbal jabs, Diaz eventually responded by throwing a water bottle in McGregor's direction. Naturally, McGregor fired back, which resulted in an all-out water bottle war.
That's alright. Hey, Conor, don't throw those Conor.
But plastic bottles aside, the fight lived up to the hype, with McGregor winning a very competitive battle via majority decision. Number 7. Tony Ferguson vs Khabib Nurmagomedov, UFC 249. Even for those who aren't particularly superstitious, it's hard to argue that a potential bout between Tony Ferguson and UFC lightweight champ Khabib Nurmagomedov isn't cursed. After all, the fight has been scheduled and then subsequently cancelled an unprecedented 5 times. While the fight itself may never happen, the two men have still given us plenty of memorable moments during their press conferences. One such incident occurred heading into their fight at UFC 249. After trading verbal jabs for nearly half an hour, the two men finally came face to face during a routine stare down. Ferguson, who once held the interim 155-pound title, laid his belt at Khabib's feet and demanded that he do the same with his. Instead, Khabib responded by kicking his would-be opponent's belt during the very heated stare down. Of course, Justin Gaethje would end up replacing Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 249 and go on to end Ferguson's 12-fight winning streak. Number 6. Conor McGregor vs Nate Diaz, UFC 196. UFC 196 was initially supposed to feature Conor McGregor attempting to capture his second UFC title by taking on Rafael dos Anjos. However, a broken foot caused dos Anjos to pull out, which opened the door for Nate Diaz in what would become one of the promotion's great rivalries. At a press conference leading up to the bout, Diaz and McGregor were involved in a stare-down that could only be described as tense. The encounter got really heated when the well-dressed Irishman decided to remove his opponent's fist from his face by slapping it away. The Stockton native didn't take kindly to this gesture, and a brawl nearly erupted. Fortunately, UFC officials and security were able to keep things from getting out of hand. As for the fight itself, Diaz managed to secure the biggest submission win of his career, and went seemingly from being a fan favourite to a mainstream star overnight. Number 5. Jon Jones vs Anthony Johnson, UFC 187. Unlike Daniel Cormier, Jon Jones and the man he was scheduled to face at UFC 187, Anthony Johnson, were actually on good terms. In fact, the two even worked together to play a prank on Dana White during a promotional face-off, when, as a humorous nod to the DC vs Jones press conference, Johnson shoved the light heavyweight king, who, in turn, pretended he was ready to take part in yet another pre-fight brawl. However, this time around, both men started laughing and reassured a terrified Dana White that it was all in good fun. In an interesting twist of fate, Jones was suspended due to a hit-and-run incident and was replaced by his rival Daniel Cormier, following which Cormier would end up defeating Johnson to capture Jones's vacated title. Number 4. Conor McGregor vs Eddie Alvarez, UFC 205. At UFC 205, Conor McGregor would finally get his chance to capture a second title when he faced Eddie the Underground King Alvarez. During the press conference, McGregor was able to get under the lightweight champ's skin by showing up late. Out of frustration, Alvarez temporarily left the press conference and left his lightweight title sitting at the table. When McGregor finally arrived, he decided to confiscate his opponent's belt, which prompted Alvarez to return. After exchanging some heated words, Alvarez tossed a folded chair in McGregor's direction, which immediately set him off. McGregor then lifted the chair into the air and aimed it straight for Eddie Alvarez. Fortunately though, Dana White managed to intercept the chair and prevent the conference from turning into WrestleMania. While there was plenty of anticipation for the bout, the fight itself was a one-sided affair, with McGregor securing a TKO victory late into the second round, becoming the first UFC star to hold titles simultaneously. Number 3. Michael Chiesa vs Kevin Lee, UFC Summer Kickoff Press Conference. If there's one thing we learned at the 2017 UFC Summer Kickoff Press Conference, it's that Michael Chiesa doesn't take kindly to anyone talking about his mother. Both Chiesa and Kevin Lee were in the midst of a heated exchange, when the Motown phenom made the mistake of mentioning his opponent's mother.
But I just hope he shows up because I know his mama got tickets, so...
While the comment itself seemed relatively harmless, it clearly didn't sit well with Chiesa. And as a result, he sprang from his seat and immediately began shouting at Kevin Lee.
Don't talk about my mom for one. Don't you ever talk about my mom. Don't you ever talk about my fucking mom.
After which, he then darted across the stage to attack Lee, but was met with a big right hand before UFC officials managed to get between the two. The pair finally got a chance to settle their differences at UFC Fight Night 112, where Lee managed to sink in a rear naked choke and secure a first round submission victory. Number 2. Yoel Romero vs Israel Adesanya, UFC 248. Unlike many of the incidents featured on our list, the press conference heading into UFC 248 didn't feature a physical altercation or intense verbal exchange. This particular press conference is in fact remembered for the wild dance-off between its headliners, UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya and Yoel Romero. Given that Adesanya is the flashier fighter and roughly 13 years younger than the now 43-year-old opponent, a dance-off would have seemed to favour the champion on paper. For his part, the last stylebender showed some solid dancing skills. However, he was unexpectedly shown up by his aging opponent. Sadly, the dance-off wound up being far more entertaining than the fight itself, when at UFC 248, Adesanya would retain his title in a contest that featured little action. Number 1. Tito Ortiz vs Ken Shamrock, UFC 40. Ken Shamrock and the Huntington Beach bad boy Tito Ortiz were involved in one of the UFC's first great rivalries. Unfortunately, inside the cage, Ken Shamrock was dealt 3 TKO losses to Tito Ortiz, with each being more devastating than the last. Outside of the cage, things didn't go a whole lot better for the world's most dangerous man, as Ortiz always had a knack for getting under Shamrock's skin, which was made all the more obvious during their first press conference at UFC 40. After Shamrock delivered what came off as an awkward pro wrestling style threat, Ortiz sat in silence before eventually leaning back in his seat and erupting in laughter.
I hope to God you come ready, because if you don't, I'm going to beat you into the living death.
The response clearly got a rise out of Shamrock, who doubled down on his threat of violence by kicking a nearby chair into the air, which humorously made its way into the arms of Dana White. The incident ultimately set the stage for their first fight in 2002, which Ortiz won with a first round TKO. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching guys, and we'll see you on the next video.